So I was raised the only white child at the end of 6 hours of dirt road in rural Honduras. My parents worked for an NGO for 20 years in Central America. And when we actually moved back to the United States in 1987, we moved to this suburb of Minneapolis, Minnesota called Anoka, Minnesota. And within a week and a half of them moving back to Anoka, Minnesota, they got this little welcome basket. It said, "Oh, hi, welcome to Anoka, Minnesota. Here's your supermarket and here's your grocery store and oh, that's the same thing. Sorry. Here's your mechanic, and here's your post office, and here's all the churches in the area, and welcome. And if you need anything, please do let us know. Your little neighborhood association in Oka, Minnesota, and Coon Rapids and Blaine, Minnesota. Thank you very much." That happened in '87 when my parents moved to a suburb of Minneapolis in the '80s. But here we are in the 2000s, and you have all of these founders moving to Silicon Valley and wanting to come to Silicon Valley from around the globe, and they all have to kind of figure out how everything works on their own. Like, that was crazy. Like, Silicon Valley promises the world that this is the place to build a startup. After the founders get here, everybody's like, swim, go, figure it out. Which is kind of insane. And from a macroeconomics perspective, it just doesn't make sense. And so all of this was swimming around in my mind, and I decided that this was going to be my pitch to investors. Hey, hi, I'm Jonathan, Hackers and Founders, blah, 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 meetup, blah, blah, blah. What do I do with this community? There's thousands of entrepreneurs, and I think a number of them are kind of dying for lack of connections in Silicon Valley, or they're coming here and moving back, and they might be here for a month or two, and it really takes 3 to 4 months to build out like a decent business network in Silicon Valley. What do I do with this? There's got to be other resources, because I'm working as a nurse. Like, I save lives and wipe ass as an emergency room nurse 3 nights a week and code 4 nights a week. The first person I reached out to was this guy by the name of Naval Ravikant, and he had started this website called AngelList about 6 months earlier. I knew a guy who had done some work for him before, so I said, "Hey, dude, can I talk with Naval? Like, here's my blurb. Who's helping people at the grassroots in Silicon Valley connect with investors?" Naval took a couple of minutes, took 20 minutes with me, and he said, "Yeah, I'll meet you." And in that 20 minutes, he's like, "Yeah, so what's going on?" And I'm like, I explained it, and he was like, yeah, I totally get it. Like, here's what I'm doing on AngelList. Blew my mind back then. And I said, he's like, "Yeah, you know what? If you actually have good startups that are, dying for lack of connections, introduce them to me." I was like, "Okay, who do you want to meet?" He's like, "Great startups." I said, "What's a great startup?" He's like, "A great startup." I'm like, "No, I don't know what a great startup is." He's like, great pitch, great traction, great team, great social proof." I'm like, "Okay, what's traction?" He's like, "I know it when I see it." I'm like, "No, what is traction? What does that mean?" I have no idea. And he's like, and I'm like, "Okay, what's your idea of a great team?" And he's like, And so he kind of gave me his, idea of what those 5 questions were. And I went home and I was really flummoxed. Like, here's one of the top angel investors in Silicon Valley willing to take meetings from people that I recommend to him. But, like, I'm going to suck at recommending startups. Like, even to this day, I know that I don't know. So how do we do this? How do I do this? I was like, I don't want to be the gatekeeper to this investor guy. How about we crowdsource the selection process? How about we make a Google Doc, 5 questions, 5 points, 10 people reviewing the questions. 4 reviewers per application. We'll average the scores. People can get their score, maybe a little written feedback from each reviewer. And the top scoring startups have 20 minutes with one of the top angel investors in town. So we did that. We did that a couple of years ago. We screened the first time, I think we actually screened 16 or 18 applications. We introduced the top 6. Laura helped me organize it. She's a genius at that. And after 3 hours, Naval was like, "Holy crap, this was great. Do you know what you have here?" And I was like, "People I have beer with?" And he's like, "No, like, this is really cool. Like, these 2 are ready to go out to AngelList now. These 2, still. I see why they got through, but not ready. And these two, you know what? If they went to an incubator, they would be ready in a good 3 to 4 months. And I was like, cool. I'm building a search engine for financial news. Ding. And Naval's like, no, that's actually cool. How often could you do this? Could you do this twice a year? I was like, I can do this every other week. He's like, are you kidding me? I'm like, yeah, no. He's like, let's do this again. So we did. Over the course of 3 months, we screened 64 companies, introduced the top 18 by score. At the end of it, Naval was like, you've got to drop whatever you're doing and start an incubator. It's like, okay, what do I do? How does that happen? Like, do you know that I'm a nurse? I save lives. I wipe ass. That's my job. Like, in the spare time, I'm building a search engine. Ding, for financial news. And after talking for a while about what to do, he said, you know what, focus on helping these startups get funded. Make it kind of like the support ecosystem, support infrastructure for startups, Founders Anonymous, something like that. Help founders help each other out. I was like, okay. So we did. We got together. He picked 8 startups that we should start working with. We got together every week for dinner. My attitude was, I have no idea what I'm doing, but let's talk about our problems. Like, let's go around the table and talk about what problems we have. And at very least, we feel better and we've had a drink. And at the end of it, we'll see if we can help each other out. And so we did. Out of the 8 companies, 2 of them kind of died right away. I ran around town trying to connect these startups with any investor that I would possibly give me the time of day. My pitch was, hi, Jonathan, work as a nurse. This is my meetup. These are startups at Naval, handpicked after we crowdsourced. They're like, who? I was like, at Naval, picked these startups. They're like, yeah, let me talk with company 2, 3, and 8. Or 2, 3, and 4. I'm like, okay, there you go. Next investor was like, yeah, let me talk to 1, 2, and 5. I'm like, there you go. Before 3 months were over, all 6 startups that were alive still, all of them had at least 1 seed check coming from investors. It's been 3 years since then. Out of those 6 startups, I believe 2 have been acquired. 1 recently closed their Series A. 1's profitable, and 2 are actually have significant growth and traction, and they're going to go out for Series A when they're good and ready. So we also did other things, like we had a scotch tasting. How do you do not a demo day for investors and get them to come and talk with your startups? Microsoft BizSpark bought $2,000 worth of whiskey, and by Jove, you talk about a 28-year-old single cask bottle of scotch, and you'll get investors from Sequoia, Greylock, Highland Capital, you name it. They ended up showing up. And a lot of the investors were like, oh, wow, great job. Naval showed up that night. He's like, great job. Problem is, you need to keep your momentum going. You need to actually have your next class right there. I'm like, okay, how do I pay the bills?